welcome again, Brent.
Oh, thanks for having me.
What a rare blend you are of visual and religious sensibility. I mean, it's amazing. You see things through a sacred lens.
Why, thank you. I think some of that has to do with the training I had as a photographer in college, but I do think it has something to do with this Quaker idea of spirituality, of paying attention. Since we worship in silence, we're often called to pay attention to what's going on around us, and certainly when we learn to do that in love, it's much easier to see God's presence all around us.
I wonder if you could speak about that a little bit more, Brent, because the more I read about Quaker spirituality, the more I'm interested in this value of silence in your spiritual practice. Just a little explanation of how that's important in a Quaker experience.
Well, the silence of a Quaker spirituality is less like a Zen silence or some other religious silences, in that it's not just being quiet to empty ourselves, it's actually getting quiet so that we can hear the voice of God or perceive God around us. And I think that that's one of the unique things that the Quaker silence brings to us. It's saying, pay attention. Where is God in this moment? Where is God, if it's a group worshiping in silence, where is God in the silence of this group? Is it in a baby crying gently or somebody's cough? Or if it's in the silence we carry inside us, stillness in our hearts as we move through daily life, perhaps we see God peeking at us over a shoulder in a checkout line at a grocery store, or just in the beauty of the trees, naked limbs uplifted in the fall, shot by light.
Now, that's a beautiful statement on spiritual silence. But I'm going to play devil's advocate here with you for a minute, because most Quakers I know are very noisy on questions of peace and justice. Yes. After all, the Quakers are part of a historic peace church, and you actually went to Washington, D.C. and demonstrated against the war. And this is all part of what you feel God is calling you to do.
Right. I think part of that paying attention, the silence is not meant to be a silence that is inactive. It's to be a silence which is active. And the activity often grows out of the silence. If we're listening for God, then we have to begin to ask those sorts of questions that are too complex for a little bracelet that says, what would Jesus do? It's a deeper question, what would Jesus have me do? What am I called to do? What does the gospel teach me? So how should I act towards war and conflict? How should I act towards inequality of the races or genders? It leads us to activity. So it's a silence which is soulfully satisfying, but ultimately it calls us out into the world.
We have to talk about light.
Absolutely. I was going to say, you've written a wonderful book, Mind the Light. Can you explain for us a little bit about the Christ light within that you talk about in the book, and how that's important in this process as well?
Certainly. The Quakers began as calling themselves the children of light. Was one of their phrases. Quakers was a derogatory term that somebody else gave to us. Our official name is the Religious Society of Friends. But one of the reasons they called themselves children of light was seeing Christ as the light of the world, as Jesus refers to himself in the scriptures. And so it was believed that that light, since Jesus said, I am the same yesterday, today, and forever, that light is available to us today. And so the phrase, mind the light, which is the title of the book, is an admonition to pay attention, to heed the light. In its most spiritual sense, it's meaning the light of Christ. But I think that we can expand that theme to say, if God created light, which we read in Genesis, the greater light and the lesser lights, then there is light all around us that we need to be paying attention to, both God, Christ, Holy Spirit within our lives, guiding and illuminating our lives, calling us to action, but also the light that's about us and how it influences how we see things, how we see people, and how we respond to them.
You say in the book that all God's creatures are pulled toward the light, and you talk about inner light, outward light, artificial light, translucent light. I want to hear the story about the light that came about when you took your grandson to Washington, D.C. to see the art museum and at the National Gallery, and what happened when you both looked at Chardin's painting of the fruit in the jug?
Well, it's amazing. We take our grandchildren when they turn 10 on a train trip to Washington, D.C. over 4th of July. And we never know how they'll respond to different things. And we let them pick where they want to go. And we went to the National Gallery. We always do because I want to go there. And so this one
you were
child...
an art major and
no, I was an art major. And this one child, this 10-year-old, Austin, is a very bright kid and very busy kid, so I didn't think he'd handle the art museum well. But when we got to that painting, and then I tried to explain how real, how he played with light, Austin was just dumbstruck too. And he just took my hand and he goes, "That's amazing." I mean, just the translucence of that painting and how the painter worked it with art. He said, "It's so real, it's so moving." And so we stood there in gratitude to the gift of God to that artist, which was then transmuted to us.
And you said that his response was, your 10-year-old grandson, "It's cool."
It's cool.
And he moved a little closer to his grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, talking about light again, you talk about us seeing it as Christ in our lives, but also seeing it in other people.
Right.
Can you speak about that a little bit, about actively looking towards that and paying attention with love, as you said, to get to that place?
One of the Quaker hallmarks has been a statement by our founder, George Fox, to look for that of Christ in everyone, walk cheerfully over the world. And so to look then and realize that other people are as loved as we are, that may be hard for us to take at one level because we'd like to think we're the favorites. But it changes how then we respond to people. If we're looking, we begin to move beyond these surface things that annoy us, the person who cut us off on the interstate or jumped in front of us in line at the grocery store, and we begin to think, what's going on with their life? What is God doing with them? What is this moment in their time? And as we begin to do that, I think we become much more sensitive to our commonality and not the differences. And one of my favorite new friends is the bag boy at the grocery store who discusses philosophy with me.
And you give homeless people rides in your car.
Which
and
everything tells you not to do that.
Right.
But you see the face of Christ on all
right.
God's children. And I want to ask you about your amazing literary, you read widely, and the amazing literary allusions in your book from Goethe and the light, talks about light and the holy, the spiritualist Hildegard of Bingham, and the splendor of light. Your favorite hymn, talk about light as silence.
Immortal, invisible, God only wise. With that wonderful line, as silent as light, which we all sing, we may sing frequently, but to realize, what does that mean, that God is silent as light?
And I was alone when I was reading your book, and I just lit up when you referred to my favorite poet, Emily Dickinson. But talk about the context of her words connected with the grief that was your acquaintance over your friend Greg.
Well, I think we assume that when we talk about spiritual light, that it's always uplifting and is always strongly sensed. And yet there are those times when the light seems dim as we're trying to make our way. And when my friend Greg, when we were both 20, killed himself at my house, lots of folks came with encouragement or what they thought was encouragement, but the friends who spoke most to my soul and my condition were the ones who had been through situations like that and didn't say anything necessarily. They sat. And I think they showed the words of Dickinson as true. When Jesus speaks about himself as grief, then we listen, because that is something we're acquainted with. And so there's a trust of the common experience. And friends can share light in those darkest experiences when they don't have to give us easy answers. And it teaches us we don't have to give easy answers. We just have to be with them and be God's light reflecting.
And you see that through poetry and music.
I was going to say we could talk on and on with you, Brent, and we're so glad that you've joined us today. A wonderful book, Mind the Light. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.